Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're here for today's webinar. So my name is David Mainville. I'm one of the co-founders of Navvia. So why am I qualified to talk about ITSM tool implementations? So I've been in the ITSM space my entire career for many years. And about 23, 24 years ago, we started Navvia, which was a consultancy that was focused on implementation of ITSM processes and tools. And we did that work for quite a while. So during that time, we had our share of success. We learned a lot along the way. And I just want to share some of that practical advice with you. A little bit about our company. So like I said, we started off as a consulting company back in the day and did a lot of work. And, like folks here on the call, we had to do process documentation. We had to do technical requirements gathering. We had to do the implementation work, training, communications, all of the things that are part of a successful ITSM tool implementation. And we used a lot of the standard products to help us do that. We used PowerPoint for presentations, and we used Visio for process documentation, and Word, and all of those various things. And we just found that it wasn't the most productive way to do it. So we built a tool in-house to help us be more productive with ITSM tool implementations. And that was the genesis of our product, Navvia. Fast forward a number of years, we exited the consulting business. So we no longer do ITSM tool implementations, but we now support our software product, which is used by a lot of organizations, as well as other consulting companies to be much more effective, much more efficient in the design of ITSM processes and the implementation of those processes and tools. Here on the screen are just a few of the badges that we've earned along the way. We are very proud of our company and of what we've accomplished. And if you'd like to check us out some more and check out some of our reviews, you can go to g2.com, which is a peer-to-peer software review site, and check it out there. So today's topic is around ITSM tool implementation. Now, we all know why you implement ITSM tools, right? They can really help you improve service delivery. They can help you enhance efficiency. They can, if done right, will increase customer satisfaction. And it really allows you to better manage your ITSM processes and resources, leading to improved productivity and overall organizational performance. Now, I've seen a lot of ITSM tool implementations over the years. And sometimes, people are focused, solely on the product. Here's the product. We want to just install it and get it going as fast as possible. And they leave out a lot of the things that will actually make the project a success. So in our view, the key activities of an ITSM tool implementation starts with planning. What is it you're trying to accomplish? Why are you installing the tool in the first place? Are you upgrading a tool? Are you changing out a tool because it's not meeting your current requirements? Speaking of requirements, understanding those requirements are crucial to a successful ITSM tool implementation, because those are the objectives that you're trying to solve with the implementation of a new tool. Then there's the selection. If you haven't already decided a tool, what's the right tool? Then there's the customization and configuration. Ideally configuration. You don't want to customize unless you really have to, but there's the configuration and customization. Data migration. Are we going to migrate our data? Are we just going to start fresh? How do we want to handle those things? Training and user adoption. I remember one CIO on a project we were working with actually said, we don't need to do training because our users are smart enough just to figure it out along the way. And that may sound great. You have smart users, sure, they can use a tool, but did they really understand the process? Do they really know how to properly assess a change? For example, if you're doing change management, or what kind of information goes into incidents and problems. So training and user adoption go hand in hand, because you can't have user adoption without training. Then there's, of course, the testing and quality assurance, your deployment and go live. And another thing people often leave out is the continuous improvement, because installing that tool isn't a one-time affair. As a matter of fact, because I've been in this space long enough, I've seen organizations change tools multiple times. And quite often it's because they allowed their old tool to become unruly. Things like, categorization for incidents just became a list, which ends up resulting in no categorization at all. It's such a long list. Or, they just, their workflows get all convoluted, and the way the requirements are handled and the way the governance of the tool is done just becomes so poor that they end up replacing the tool because that's the easiest way to continue. So continuous improvement, a key part of every project. So like I said before, we're not an ITSM implementation company, but I would like to just ask the audience this question so I can sort of gauge the presentation based on the audience here. So is your organization going through an ITSM tool selection, implementation, or upgrade? We're going to put that poll up on the screen in a moment. And here it is. So if you could just take a moment and respond to that, that would be greatly appreciated, just to give me a sense of who is who's where. So we're seeing the results come in. And again, as those results are coming in, I do encourage everyone to be interactive throughout this presentation. I'm very open in sharing anything that, we've learned along the way, and I'm just happy to interact with folks. We will also have a dedicated Q&A at the end of the presentation for any additional questions. So I think that's, we got about 39% of the people participating. If we can just get a few more there to get a sense of what's going. I don't want to take too long. I'll let it go for another maybe 5-10 seconds. We've got about 42% of the people participated. So it looks like let's go ahead and just close out the poll here for now. So it looks like approximately a small number of you are going through an ITSM tool selection. So we will be talking about tool selection as part of this presentation. Some of you are implementing a brand new ITSM tool. I assume that means you're coming off of an old platform, moving to a new platform. So what we're talking about here would definitely be applicable to you. Upgrading an existing ITM tool is about 53% of the folks. And again, I think there's some stuff here in the presentation that will be of value to you as well. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll. And, when it comes to, oops, I just want to let's close that. So when it comes to implementing an ITSM tool, one of the things I've learned through my career, when it comes to projects that fail, and believe me, a substantial number of ITSM tool initiatives do fail. And when it comes to those failures, it's seldom the tool that's the problem. We live in a world today where there's so many options for ITSM tools, and most of them, because of the ITSM space being so mature, and we've been doing this for so many years, all the tools have the basic features. They can do incident, change, configuration management. They have CMDBs. So when it comes to implementing these things, it's seldom a lack of features in the tools that's the problem. It's all those other things that I spoke about that go around the implementation of the tool. Things like lack of process definition, things like lack of planning, not understanding the requirements. So what I want to do is maybe throw it out to you folks, and if you will, share with me just some of the things that you feel are the reasons ITSM implementations fail. So I'd appreciate if you guys in the chat just throw out some of the things that you've seen. I'll read through the list here, and I can basically provide some of that feedback to you. So if let's see here. We got from Jacques, no training. We got improper planning. Pierre says, too ambitious. That's a great one, Pierre. Biting off more than you can chew can often be a reason your project will fail. We got Kavitha. Hey, Kavitha, how you doing? Lack of process ownership. Yeah, if you don't have owners for your processes, who's going to drive the implementation work? Lack of governance, Pierre. That's a great one. Aaron, that was Aaron. Sorry, Aaron. Pierre says poor data from old tool to the new one, so data migration. Yep, all of these things can really, no ITSM practice. Thanks, Christine. No ITSM practice within the organization. These are all really good reasons your project can fail. What I'll do is I'll just share with you some of the things that I've seen from experience. Hey, Terry, insufficient understanding of what the tool can do for you. That's quite insightful. That's great. Letting the tool drive the processes. These are all great reasons. So let me just sort of summarize these and with some of the ones that we've seen over the years. So in our experience, poor planning tops the list. It's, it's a significant project. You're basically replacing a tool that's responsible for all of your IT workflows. And without good planning, that project can be, you're really not getting the project off on a good footing. No requirements. So when you select a new tool, what are you selecting for? When you're implementing a new tool, do you understand how you want that tool customized to meet the needs of your users? Because a lack of requirements is going to result in something that's not going to meet the needs of the users and result in poor satisfaction. Something we call a lift and shift. I don't know if you folks are familiar with the term lift and shift, but let's say you have an existing ITSM tool, and because of the lack of planning and the lack of requirements, you basically take everything you configured in your old tool and move it over to the new tool. So you don't spend any time rationalizing basically categorizations or workflows. You basically try to replicate what you have into the new one because you couldn't get new requirements or you didn't develop the proper requirements for the implementation. So you're just lifting one problem and shifting it over to another. And you'll find out over time that that's not going to do it for you. Someone else mentioned this scope creep, biting off more than you can chew. I think it was Pierre that said that, biting off more than you can chew. So when you go in with a plan, if you don't have a plan, then scope creep will just take over. But if you have a good plan, you can help minimize the scope creep. But the scope creep, if you want to keep adding features, adding functionality, adding workflows, you need to be able to control that and contain it. So maybe not in phase one, but in phase two, or else your implementation date is going to keep shifting. Out of the box, someone else said, I forget who was, I think it was Pierre also that said, letting the tool drive your processes. That's kind of what I mean by out of the box. Now, out of the box, quite frankly, could work for some organizations. There are organizations out there that may have a low level of maturity, and just following some processes or what's built into the tool out of the box might meet your needs. But, that's not for everybody. And if you try to force an organization, well, I'll give you a perfect example. We were working with a financial services organization. So we were brought in to help with the processes in this particular engagement. And there was a different organization that was going to drive the tool implementation. And they were, when it came to the customizations, they were really forcing an out of the box kind of implementation because it was going to be quick. They'd get the project done, and move on to the next. But the thing is, this was a large, complex organization. A change process, for example, required cabs that were multiple cabs around the globe. They were trying to shoehorn somebody into an out of the box that had far more complex requirements. Now, I'm not saying requirements to customize the tool, but I'm talking about even configuring. So, they spent one day trying to understand the requirements for a global organization and really were shoving this out of the box approach. And, there's so many things in organizations with legacy systems, with just the way information is communicated from one division to another. Unless you understand that, you're going to end up with a new tool implementation that has a lot of gaps in it. So out of the box can be a problem in our experience for a poor ITSM tool implementation. Lack of involvement. You're putting these tools in to support a certain community of users. You're trying to solve their problems, their issues, their requirements. And if they're not involved, how can you deliver something that meets their needs? So getting the involvement of your user community is key. Poor communication throughout the project, as well as not having your processes defined. How do you automate an IT workflow if you don't really understand what the IT workflow is? So these are just some of the reasons, and adding to the list of other reasons that you folks shared with me, which I really appreciate. Matt also wanted to add connection to strategic intent, business process integration with ITSM. So a lot of great stuff from the community here that can be added to this list. So one of the first things I want to talk about is vendor selection. I think there was about 6% of you that said you're going through that process. One of the interesting quotes that I've seen from Gartner is that leaders will overspend by $2 billion buying unused features of ITSM platforms. And that's up from $1 billion in 2021. So what does that mean? It's buying more product than you need. If your organization is not that mature, let's say, do you need all of the features of the state-of-the-art ITSM tool? It's nice to have, it's nice to have the Jag, right? Or it's nice to have the top-of-the-line vehicle. But do you need all the features in that vehicle? You really need to align those features for what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're an immature organization, you might not want to buy the most advanced, complex ITSM tool just because you think you might use the features. Chances are you won't, because you'll get bogged down in your day-to-day and your other projects, and you'll really never be able to implement some of the features of the tool. So you really need to assess what your requirements are before you do the selection. And, just because someone is, if you look at a Gartner Magic Quadrant of different products, you might, maybe you don't want the leaders in the space. You might be better off with some of the up-and-coming innovators, or somebody who's more in the middle of the pack, because their requirements meet your needs and they're also less expensive, right? So don't buy your ITSM tool based on marketing hype. You need to understand your maturity level, and you need to select a tool that's based on features that you're going to use within the contract term. So if you go out and get a product, and you're going to have a 3 or 5 year term for the software license, make sure you're going to be using the features that you're contracted for within the term, or else you're leaving a whole bunch of money on the table. You also really need to know how complex the tool is to tailor and support. Like, we work with a lot of organizations who have our software, and they have, development teams, whether they're in-house, offshore, or contracted resources. They've had to build up development teams to support the ITSM tool. And, those are typically for the more complex, more advanced tools. And does your organization really have, the resources to dedicate to having the right support? So do you need to get something that's difficult and difficult to tailor, difficult to support? Do you need to be adding all those resources? So you need to assess the fact of how complex the tool is to tailor and support. And that really factors into this total cost of ownership. What are you paying for licenses? Are you using unused features? How complex is that tool to tailor and support? Do we have some questions here, Catherine? Or
no, I just want to remind people we're recording this presentation, and we will send the email with the link to the recording and to the slides later.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine.
No problem.
So anyway, just to summarize, you really need to understand your business requirements before you do a selection. Organizations often select more tool than they need. It's also important to do a gap analysis, right? Why are you changing your tool? Well, typically organizations are changing a tool because there's a problem with the one they have. Less so for an upgrade, but when you're installing a new ITSM tool or selecting an ITSM tool, it's because you're not happy with the status quo. So what are those issues? Why are you implementing, changing, or upgrading your tool? What are the specific pain points you need to address? How easy is the current tool to use and support? How is the training and support of that tool? Is the vendor giving you what you need? Do the users have the information they need to effectively use the tool? It's really important to engage your users and not assume what those issues are. I mean, as the team who's responsible for the ITSM tool, you might have a sense of what's not working today. You might have a sense of what you need to improve. But again, these tools are there to support the users. And I would submit that an ITSM capability assessment is probably one of the most effective ways to perform the gap analysis, going out and asking questions around how easy is the tool to use? Does the tool meet your needs? Do you have the right training and support to effectively use the tool? Do you understand the process that the tool is there to support? So by structuring and launching and pulling in the results from an ITSM assessment, you can really see some of the pain points in your existing installation or implementation, so you don't make the same mistakes again. And it's also a great way to foster organizational change management, because as part of the gap analysis, you're going out and talking to people. You're sharing the fact that you want to make things better for them. And by doing the ITSM gap analysis, you'll really get the information you need to help set, or maybe help select a tool, but also set the plan for the implementation of the new tool. There's also the process definition side of things. So when it comes to, I always say, a process is the blueprint for ITSM tool implementation. Because how do you automate what you don't understand? And, this goes back to some of the folks, when you were talking about some of the reasons initiatives fail. A few of you said the lack of process or the lack of understanding what the ITSM processes are. These processes are really the Bible. And you always have to remember that the tool only handles one aspect of an ITSM process. So if I have a change management process, the tool facilitates the information that goes into a change request, let's say. It helps route the request to the right people, for sure. But it doesn't tell you how to run a CAB meeting. It doesn't tell you what your change types are. So if you were trying to develop a change model of what's a standard change, what's an emergency change, the tool doesn't tell you what that is. You have to spend time understanding what those things are from your perspective. How do you make the tool do that without going out and understanding what your processes are? You have roles and responsibilities. So for example, what is the responsibility of a submitter of a change? What's the responsibility of an approver? Yes, the tool will allow you to approve it, but who approves it? What's the responsibility? What are the lead times for a change? All of these things come from understanding your process. The tool isn't going to do that for you. So by going out and ensuring you have comprehensive process documentation, you're going to be able to do a few things. First of all, that exercise can help you identify the inefficiencies in your current processes. It can help you identify where errors are occurring or variability in the process. So you've gone out and done your assessment and you find out that the network group and the server team have two different change processes with different criteria for determining how a change is implemented and categorized and approved. That's not good, right? Or some parts of the organization follow the process and some parts of the organization don't. A tool isn't going to change that for you until you go out and understand what the processes are and get everybody on the same page. The process is going to help you identify the roles and responsibilities. What are the policies? Things like lead time, for example, of a change. What are the metrics? So how are you going to report on the process? How are you going to, what's the key performance indicators for that process? A process is going to help you define that, as well as the controls that are going to ensure that the process is adhered to. You also need to have good process documentation because it's going to help you train new employees. It's going to help you ensure that they comply with not only industry standards, but that your processes helps comply to industry regulations. So, for example, financial services organizations or which have very tight audit requirements, or healthcare organizations that have to follow, HIPAA and other health protection. There are certain things that are very important, and the process is going to identify those controls and those standards so that the employees will be, well up on how that process needs to operate in the organization. So training is another reason. And, you get new employees. Also in organizations, we're getting to a point where our population is aging, and people who might have all of this knowledge in their heads are leaving organizations. And, sometimes because of the lack of good process documentation, it's leaving the next generation sort of like, what do we do here? We don't have that sort of corporate knowledge anymore. So good process documentation will help ensure that the next generation of employees understand how these processes work. And like I said at the start of this slide, it's really the blueprint for ITSM tool implementation, because you can't automate a workflow unless you know what the workflow is. So really, really important. Another thing I'd say to that is when I think of process documentation, it goes beyond a flow chart, right? I talked a little bit about roles, responsibilities, policies, metrics, controls, but it's also the technical specifications that helps drive the implementation. So this process flow, for whether it's an incident or a change, at some point you have to realize, like, who gets notified. So if this change is closed or if this incident ticket is created, who gets notified? In the flow, you can identify where certain technical requirements need to be captured, where certain notifications have to happen. So it really aids in the automation of the process as well. So when I think of a process, I go beyond the flow chart. I go right all the way to technical specs and requirements, user stories that actually support that implementation of a process in a tool. That comes to the requirements piece. So tight requirements will result in faster implementation with less rework. And this is going to help you manage scope. So I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we used to be an ITSM implementation company. We used to implement processes and tools. And one of the things that we were able to do is we were able to get to the point where we fixed priced our work. That's kind of unheard of, at least from my experience these days. And the reason we were able to fix price the work, go into a bid and say, this is how much we're going to charge to implement the tool, is because we did our homework. We had the processes defined. We had tight requirements. And by having those tight requirements, we were able to estimate with a lot of clarity what it was going to take to implement the process in a tool. So we were able to give a bid to a client who said, this is how much it's going to cost you, not to exceed. And we were able to do that because of the really, really tight requirements. So I submit that, for whether you're an ITSM consulting company like we were, or you're an in-house implementation team that's implementing the tool, having those tight requirements are going to, contain the scope, and they're going to allow you to implement your product on time and on budget. Now, that all starts with something called user stories. We're a big believer in user stories at Navvia because a user story is really a way of capturing in business terms, not technical terms, but business terms, what you're trying to accomplish with the tool. And that's funny because I've seen examples of user stories. I saw a user story around change interceptor labels. Well, how is that a user requirement, right? How is that a business requirement? Change interceptor labels might be the result of a business requirement, but it is not the business requirement. So it's really important to start with understanding what it is that your organization wants out of this tool. And you start with user stories. And user stories are tightly aligned to the process. So as you step your way through the process, each step in the process might have one or more user stories associated with it. Talking about how something is submitted, how something is notified, who needs to be notified of something. What do you need to kick off a certain process? So these user stories in business terms are the first step in really understanding. And I think it's critical when you're mapping out your business processes, your IT processes, that you capture those user stories. It's a great opportunity to foster a dialogue with your users, right? Because you're sitting down with them saying, what is it you need, what you're looking for, what's the requirement? If you're sitting down, if you're automating a sales process, it's really a good idea to sit down with the salespeople. If you're automating a change process, it's really good to sit down with the teams of folks who actually submit the changes and manage the implementation of those changes and understand in business terms what they're looking for. Now, once you have those business requirements mapped in user stories, and again, those should be aligned to the process. In this little picture here I have off on the side, you can see the process across the top and the user stories mapped to each of the steps in the process. Once you have that, then you can start getting technical. So if the requirement is to have a form, the technical aspect of this is what fields are on the form. who's notified when the form is submitted? Where does it go in the workflow once it's submitted? So these things actually support the user story. Now, when you map the requirements, right, it's really great because you can identify gaps when you map it to the process, because if steps in your process don't have user stories, it might be an indication that you haven't captured all the requirements. So by having good mapping between the process and the user stories, you can really identify perhaps gaps, and you can then drill down and find out what you need to know before you start implementing the tool. Here's a little example of what I mean by that. So let's say you have a process, and that process is about implementing an employee, a very, very simple process around employee expenses, right? So the employee submits an expense form. The manager either approves or doesn't approve the expense form. The manager submits the expense for payment, and the employee is reimbursed through the financial group. So a very, very simple process, right? Well, you can develop user stories for each of these steps in the process. So you can have a user story for submitting the expense form. So the employee conforming to accounting policies must submit a detailed expense form. And you can capture these various user stories for each step in the process. Then, once you understand what the business is looking for, you can then look at the technical requirements to support that user story. So we need these specific fields on the expense form. We need to recreate an expense report number. We need to send notification to the manager once it's submitted. We need to change statuses. All of the different things that need to happen to support that particular user story can be captured in the technical requirements. Quite often people jump right to the technical requirements without that linkage back to the business requirements. So that can often create gaps in your implementation because, and I've seen it. Here's another example. Once we got invited to sit in on a call where so again, we were doing the process work and we got invited to sit in on a call with a different implementation partner. And they jumped right into the screen. You know, no process discussion of the process at all. They brought up a form and they said, what fields do you want in the form? What do you want in the drop-down list? And that was the workshop they were trying to build. But they were just basically workshopping it and just, and this is where things like lift and shift can happen because, these were the fields you had in the old form. I guess I need them in the new form without any rationalization, without any thought of improvement, without even, understanding whether those things were even valid anymore. They might have been, legacy, and you're just bringing legacy things forward. So really important to get the user stories first and then map the requirements to those user stories. There's different implementation strategies that you can take when it comes to these implementations as well. Out of the box, lift and shift, big bang. These are some buzzwords that, have been around. Some of you may or may not be familiar with them, but these can lead to project failure. You need to understand the risks. So I spoke a little bit already about the out of the box. It's an increasingly popular implementation approach because it's fast, right? Let's just do this out of the box. And it may be best suited for smaller, less complex organizations, but I'm telling you, if you're a global financial services organization, I highly doubt an out-of-the-box implementation is going to work for you, no matter how much you might be driven that way, either from the vendor or from senior management, or saying, let's keep this out of the box, let's keep this out of the box. It's going to be hard to do because you just have so many. Your processes are more complex. You have legacy systems, you have information that might need to be integrated into the tool. So, other systems that might need to be integrated into the tool. So it's really important, to know where out of the box might be a limiting factor. And I spoke a little bit also about the lift and shift. Again, just to repeat myself a little bit, lift and shift is the practice of replicating what you have in the current tool in the new ITSM tool. But does this really improve things? I'd submit it doesn't. If you're implementing a new tool, if you're selecting a tool, this is your opportunity to make things better. So you need to do your homework, you need to do your assessments, you need to have your process information done, because that's going to give you all the tools you need to have a successful project. Big bang also is something, and I think someone referred to, biting off more than you can chew, or too large a project. But we've seen organizations try to implement everything all at once. And this is a recipe for a disaster. It can lead to a lot of scope creep and delays. So it's best to do things in a more phased approach if you can. It might require you to sort of live with a couple of tools for a while as you move everything over. But big bang is often a very difficult way to address an ITSM tool implementation. So in our opinion, a process-driven agile approach where you focus on one or two processes, you get those done right, you get them implemented, you get them rolled out, you get people trained before bringing in others, is a good way to achieve success. Then there comes the training and governance part of things. So it's really crucial to the long-term success. Again, well, another example I'll throw out there. We saw one organization, for whatever reason, decided to implement the change management process using a request module of the tool without using the fundamental change module. And it was a bit of a mess because when it came to upgrading the platform later on, it was just, they had to basically go back and just undo everything. And that all comes around governance, right? Do you have an architecture for your tool? Do you have people who are responsible for the tool? Is there governance? Is there, who's controlling, what workflows get approved and what workflows don't get approved? Changes to drop-down lists. All of this governance is crucial to your long-term success, because without a good architecture, without a good plan, you can end up getting yourself back into the same mess you started with. You'll end up, having the, and the people are going to they're going to end up blaming the tool for it. Oh my God, this tool is so hard to use. It's so complex. I don't understand it. But that's not because the tool is complex and hard to use. It's because the implementation of the tool made it complex and hard to use. So governance is so important. And also, that also goes to training, right? People will complain about, I don't know how to do this in the tool. But if they haven't been trained on how to do it, then, there's no excuse, right? I mean, well, that is an excuse, but without training, how are they expected to, you just can't expect people to know what the process is and how to follow the process. So it's important, it's one of the reasons I believe that people change tools is dissatisfaction. But again, was it the tool that was really the problem? Or was it just compounding implementation errors that got that tool so unruly that you now needed to, the easiest thing to do was start fresh? You need to put a governing body in place to control the implementation, the upgrades and customizations. And you need to do that from standards, right? You have to have standards around, what's your change model? What's your change types? All of these things need to be planned ahead of time. And then if there's changes to those things, there really has to be a process by which those changes are made so that you're not actually creating more complexity in your tool. You need to review and assess all changes to the platform before implementing. You need to have a robust training program, not only for your end users, but also for the developers and administrators of the tool. They really need to be very up on how that product works so that they can support it properly. And then you also need to develop key performance indicators and metrics for your processes so that you can drive continual improvement in the tool. So if you're looking at reducing the number of incidents that are escalated, things that can help you do that is having a better knowledge base, having better people on the front line, making sure that all the incidents that can come in can get turned into a problem so you can get to the root cause. You need to have all of that stuff in place because the tool's not going to do it automatically for you. So having your KPIs, having your metrics for your processes, that's going to really help you drive continual improvement of not only the process, but then the underlying tool that's supporting the process. So just to summarize some of the points so far, it's really critical not to buy more ITSM tool that you need. And as Gartner said, people are overspending or will be overspending by over $2 billion on ITSM tool technology. So be careful, understand what you need, be realistic. Are you going to be using those features? Are they something you really need, or are they a nice to have? If for some reason if you're doing an RFP and you make those mandatory features when they're really nice to have, you're going to be spending money for that. And you really should only be spending what you need to spend. You also need to drive your ITSM tool requirements through user stories, because it's the best way of understanding the business, understanding what the users want, and then translating that into requirements for the implementation. You also need to ask your users what's working or not working with your current tool. So an ITSM assessment is one of the great ways of doing that, understanding what's working so that you can correct those errors in the next implementation. Just be aware that lift and shift and out of the box may sound nice, but they seldom work. You end up with a lift and shift of having something that basically just replicates what you have. So why bother change? And out of the box is just going to, it's just going to force you into these constraints that might not meet the needs of your organization. Out of the box can work for smaller companies with immature process, because this could actually make them better. But as you get to be a more, a larger, more mature organization, out of the box seldom works. You need to define your processes before you implement your ITSM tool, because that's really the blueprint for your implementation. And you also have to put in training and governance, because it's essential to the long-term success. So what I'd like to do now is I'd just like to spend a moment and show you a little bit about how we used to use Navvia, the product, in doing our own ITSM implementations. So what I'll do is I'll just get into a little bit of a demonstration here. So what I've done is I created an instance of Navvia specifically for the ITSM tool implementation. And I'm going to focus basically on three aspects, the process documentation, the user stories and technical requirements gathering, as well as the process assessment. So in Navvia, you can actually do a number of things with the tool. You can use something we call survey to do your baseline ITSM assessment. You can use the design module to capture all your process documentation, as well as managing your development. And you can use something called verify to set up control objectives and measure those controls to ensure that your process continues to deliver value. I'll be focusing primarily here on the survey and design piece. So on the survey piece, as I said before, assessing the maturity of your process is really important, of your processes, I should say, is really important to understanding what the gaps are. Now, we did a webinar, and Catherine, maybe you can put that up in the chat if you would be so kind. We did a webinar maybe 2 months ago, or relatively, really focusing on an ITSM maturity assessment. Spent the whole webinar on that. So if you can put the link to that webinar in the chat, that'd be great, Catherine. I'm just going to touch it at a high level, but you might want to start off by doing a baseline assessment of your processes, like incident, problem, change, service configuration management, release. With the Navvia tool, it's great because you can bring in these questionnaires from pre-built questionnaires that we have. And this is what we used to use as a consulting organization to go out and assess the maturity. These questionnaires can be sent to an unlimited number of people. Each of these questionnaires have a number of questions that can really get to how well, get to an understanding of how well the processes are operating. And these questions are sort of mapped to different domains, like the people, process, technology, and partners. These questions can be sent to, like I said, an unlimited number of participants. So you can send them out to all these different folks. You can launch your project, and then through various dashboards and reports, you'll be able to see, in this example, we've got a fairly mature incident process. And now these are actually using something called the capability maturity model, if you folks are familiar with that. So processes are assessed on a level of 0 to 5. A low-level process is ad hoc, not poorly performed. A level 5 process means not only is the process operating well, but is continually being improved and enhanced. So, you can see you got a pretty good incident management process here, but your service configuration management process is at a very low level. The tool allows you to see things at a high level, as well as allowing you to go in and run various reports. Loading up it. So you can sort of see a pictorial representation of your maturity. And if you wanted to drill in and see why service configuration management isn't doing so well, you can actually see, well, it's doing pretty good from a technology perspective, but the people, the process, and the partner aspect of it is quite weak, with partner being the weakest. So if I was going in and if I was thinking about implementation of the service configuration management process in the new tool, I'd say, the problem with our process today isn't the technology as much as it is how we work within the organization from a people, partner, and process perspective. There's a lot of reports here. I'm not going to go into them all, but to kind of summarize, what this allows you to do is really communicate to a lot of people, or communicate with a lot of people, and get an understanding of what's working, what's not working, with a comprehensive set of reports that'll let you analyze right down to an individual, pull in comments, all of those things that'll help you as the implementation team truly understand what's working and what's not working with the processes before you start the new implementation. So this is a great capability. When it comes to implementing, it's great to start with the process documentation. We have here, I'll use the example of change management, but in the Navvia tool, we have templated process documentation for ITIL, both the ITIL 2011 and ITIL version 4 processes. We have process documentation that's aligned to ServiceNow specifically as a product, that's aligned to the COBIT framework, and aligned to also the APQC, which is a business process framework. Lots and lots of process templates that you can use as a starting point. They're just a straw model, right? You can bring those up with your team. You can use it to rationalize your processes with best practices. So for example, if I pop into change here, I can go into the change management process. I can go to the workflow. And all the workflows for the change management process are here. But better yet, behind each of these workflows, we have a wealth of detailed information, descriptions of each task, the roles and responsibilities for each task, the inputs, the outputs, the user stories for each task, the procedures. So this is a great template. You can work with your team, take these templates and augment them, modify them. It's just like Visio. You can drag and drop here onto the screen. You can work in real time to take a best practice template, modify it for the needs of your organization. And then the cool thing about Navvia is it automatically produces all the process documentation and technical design documentation you need, saving you just a significant amount of time, energy, and ultimately money, because you're able to do things faster and tighter with better requirements. And there's more to just workflows. Like I said, behind each of these shapes is a wealth of information. Also, the tool allows you to capture other aspects of the process, like the description and scope, the goals, the objectives, the roles. Here's all the different roles in your process, a description of each role. It allows you to capture your controls. So here's the COBIT controls for change management. You can add your own controls or modify them. All the technical specifications for the process, which I'll get to in a moment. And then from this information, Navvia will allow you to, if I want to create an executive summary of the process, it'll take all of that information, compile it, and automatically build your change management process guide without you ever having to touch a Word document. It just builds it. And if you modify your process, it updates all of the documentation for you, throws the diagrams in, has all of the corresponding detail that goes with it. The other thing that's nice about Navvia is because we capture so much information about a process, this executive summary is oops, sorry, I didn't mean to go there. This executive summary is about, 20 pages long or so, 19 pages. If I want to do a complete process document, I just have to add another filter, which you can customize. complete process document. If I want to see what the complete process document looks like, we'll basically regenerate the Word document directly from the database of information. So now I'm able to produce two different documents from one process definition, a much more detailed 38-page process or a higher level 19-page document. So you're not managing multiple iterations of the process, you're just managing one process and producing the documents you need. The other thing that Navvia allows you to do is get into the technical requirements to automate the process. And we capture this here under specifications. So so for every step in the process, I've only done one, but you can capture user stories. So if I go back into, back into this user story here. I'm going to associate this with a task. So I'll associate this user story, which is entitled Change Form Layout. I went ahead and associated with a step in the process called Create Normal Change. Update that. So actually, if I go back into the workflow, usually I do it the other way around. I would go into the step in the process, create normal change, and I'm able to create right from Navvia the user stories. So I'd be able to go in and basically create the user stories right here. So once you go through each of your steps of the process, you can capture the various user stories, and the user stories roll up to this specifications area where you see a list of your user stories. And you can now categorize those user stories. So the change form layout is part of my ITSM tool implementation project, and it's part of the epic called ITSM Change Management. It's not started, priority is medium. As the process manager, I require users to submit comprehensive and complete information for each change request, and the acceptance criteria is defined here as well. And then what we allow organizations to do is associate, let's see, do I have this here? What we allow users to do is associate information to the user story. So if I want to associate data requirements to the user story, our templates bring up sample fields that you would typically have in a change management system. So if I wanted to find what forms are going to be, or what fields are going to be on the change form, I can say, well, I want affected CIs, I want the approvers, I want the backup plan. Let's say I want the category, I want the CI, I want the change number, I want the planned end date, the planned start date. So I can go ahead and associate these items, update the user story, and now I have 5 items associated with that particular user story. I can go through not only can I capture forms on a field, if I want to capture things like email notifications, I can take a look at a set of canned email notifications and associate those with a user story. So all kinds of requirements, things like data specs, tool specs, states, metrics, triggers, email notifications, or supporting documentation can be attached and connected. Plus, you can build your own information on the fly as well. And what this allows you to do is then produce very comprehensive user story documentation for your process. So if I just take a different view of this, we looked at the complete process, we looked at the executive summary, I can now look at the user stories. And then there's my user story document produced automatically, where I have a description of the process, I have a description of what user stories are, I have my user story for change form layout, I have the project and all of those aspects, and I have all of the fields that are part of that user story. I also have all of the states in the process automatically put into the document. A change can be from new, assess, authorize, scheduled, implement, review, canceled, and close. I have the process state diagram. I have approval state diagrams. I have the high-level activities of the process so that the developer can see the context of the process with the user stories. So advantage here, good process documentation based on best practice from a ton of templates that we have built into the tool. You can take user stories and align them to every step of your process. You can capture requirements and then automatically produce your process documentation, your technical design documentation, your user story documentation. I'm only scratching the surface on the different reports that can be produced here, but you can produce a wealth of information. And if you go back and tweak any of the process information, all of this documentation is updated for you without having to do it manually. A huge time saver. That's why more and more consulting companies are becoming clients of ours, because they're using it to make their projects more effective. So as an in-house organization, you can also use this to make your internal implementations much more effective. So that's basically how a tool like Navvia can assist in your in your various ITSM tool implementation projects. I'll leave it open here for questions. I do have a couple of questions here too. So I'm going to come back to these questions in a second, just so other people can leave. I just have a few other pieces of business. So just talking about Navvia, we really covered those: process sharing, user stories, and requirements gathering, assessment and governance, ton of templates, results in value to the organization. If you want to get a really in-depth demo of the product, you can go to navvia.com/contact and we'll schedule a demo for your team. I really scratched the surface here today, but we'd be happy to do that for you. Catherine will also, when she sends out the slides and the recording, we'll have a link so you can do that. There's a couple of more webinars coming up. In October, we're going to be interviewing a client of ours on managing a global ITSM program. Registration will open soon on that. And then in December, we're going to be doing a webinar on digital transformation. So thank you for those who need to pop, because I want to be respectful of your time, but I will stick around and answer the questions that are in the queue and any other questions that may come up. So let me go look here. Process assessments can be aligned to ISO and 330. Yes, so we have a whole wealth of process assessment templates. This is from INS. INS, we have ISO 33020. We have ISO. We have the CMMI model and the ISO model for process maturity assessment. So we have those. And those are built in, and we have them for about 25 different IT processes, both the CMMI and the ISO model. Is there a document cheat sheet, or can it be created? Not sure what you mean by a document cheat sheet. So if you're still here, maybe if you can just follow up on that question, I'd be happy to respond to it. How do I see the list of participants, please? Okay, this is from Nagrathena. Let me see. Participants. Specifications for who the approver should be depending on the change. How does this get captured? Please show and tell an example if possible. So in the tool, that's done in the RACI information. So again, it's a bit of a deep dive. I don't want to get too deep in the tool. Maybe we can schedule an offline demo, but I'll show you as quickly as I can. So if we get to a place where there's an approval required, so here's assessing and evaluating change. Let's say you have a decision box here. This one is actually CR acceptable, change request acceptable. Let's see here. So you can go into the authorized change. Let's go into the authorized change. So you can go down to roles, and then you can see here everybody's role in that step in the process. Our tool builds out RACI charts, so you'll see the roles and responsibilities. So again, don't want to get too deep here because of context, but yes, we can actually get right down to the level of detail of who's responsible, who gets notified, because we capture all of the RACI information for the process. I've got 3 other messages here. Cheat sheets, basic steps for the admins teams of each practice to follow, like a high level of the process evolved. That's great. Yes, we can definitely do that. And the way we do that actually is you saw how I loaded in documents and reports, how I had these different views of the process. Well, and again, I'll just touch on it a little bit, but what's the difference between these three things? Like what makes an executive summary versus a complete process document versus a user story? So let's say you wanted to create one called a cheat sheet. So I can create a template from chat. I'll call it cheat sheet. Create it. Then in the cheat sheet, I might say, okay, you know what? I want something very, very simple here in the cheat sheet. I'm just going to go in and I just want to have, let's say, my flow diagrams. And from a task level, I want from a task level, I want the task rules. Okay, very simple. So now this document, which I can download to Word or PDF or just share through our tool with anyone. So make sure I have that updated. I can go to the document. Oops. Grab the wrong one. Give me a second here. I have to go cheat sheet. The document. Now I would have customized it a little bit more so it had I would have fixed up the formatting here and it would have said cheat sheet. But this cheat sheet is just 11 pages and it goes through the process and then it basically gives the roles and responsibilities right here. And there's other ways I can do this, but as a quick example, boom, there's your stuff. You're welcome. I appreciate that. I think we're getting to the end of the questions here. All right, well, I'll stick around for a few more minutes if anyone has any additional questions. Remember, we're going to be having a recording going out to all your folks either this afternoon or tomorrow. So look for that. And if any of you want to have a much deeper look at Navvia, I'd be happy to set that up for you. But I want to thank you all for being such a great audience here today. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, I wish you well for the rest of the day. And yeah, just reach out to us if you want to learn more.